Hi, this is Kurt Little for the Propertarian Institute. I'm doing a totally impromptu, off the cup. I think I'm a coffee cup, not that kind of cup. Anyway, I'm doing a totally impromptu, off the cuff little presentation here, a little talk here, because it helps me think through a problem. It's a recurring problem I've had over time, but especially over the past month or two. And that's how to organize the book. I can't really share the screen on here very easily and get to where I can show you the outline of the work, but it's a tome, right? It's vast. But it presents a challenge because it's one of those things where how do I tell anything without telling everything? And this is the problem with the method altogether, is that the basic premise is actually quite small. I mean, there's a particular logic to the universe. That logic maximizes the ability of the universe to compute potentials, to accumulate the defeat of entropy or accumulate stable relations of energy. And that particular algorithm, which is incredibly simple, manifests in every aspect of the universe. And so the universe can be understood as having one underlying logic, from which all other effects in the universe emerge. This includes human behavior, cognition, and sexual differences, group differences, and civilizational differences. So how do I tell that story? So I'd originally started with, I'm a logician fundamentally, right? So I originally started with, I would talk about logics. I would say, this is how logic works. This is how the logics work. There's a pattern to this logic. There's a pattern. This pattern is in geometry, especially, but all of mathematics. And that pattern tends to show up in all of life. I then worked through from the logics to language itself. I showed the manifestation of that pattern in the structure of language, continuous recursive disambiguation. And in other words, defeat of ambiguity, and then, which is the same thing as defeat of entropy. And then I took that basic understanding and I worked out from there. So then I went through with that understanding of the logics and the grammars being a deflationary or scientific language and mathematical language on one end, and inflationary, meaning those aspects of language that help us convey meaning, even if they're not as precise as, say, science, and those fictionalisms, which are the abuse of truth, meaning into the pretense of knowledge that we don't have. And I showed that technology pretty simply. So it would go from the position of those grammars and then show how this applied this pattern we see in logic and language manifests in the universe at the level of physics, up through the different physical sciences, up into biochemistry, then into the cell, into sexual reproduction, and all the way up to mankind and our brains, our cognition, how we do this. And somewhat, the overall story is essentially the evolution of computation. In other words, the universe computes. The universe computes by a very simple method. And until we get to humans, which can remember and reason, the universe can't calculate. But once you have humans, the universe can calculate, at least through us. And in that effort of calculation, what happens is that we adapt faster than the universe could adapt through trial and error computation. That's why, because calculation differs from computation, and that computation has to work with just adding in what it has, and subtracting with whatever sums it has. But with calculation, we can do prediction, or the transformation of inputs into potential outputs across a range. So That's the simple way of saying that humans vastly increase the rate at which the universe can adapt in one of its forms, just like the cell was the first machine that could help the universe adapt more quickly in its forms. And I'm staging this conversation particularly to maintain continuity with this basic idea that the universe calculates. So the universe computes and we calculate. And so that eventually man ends up being the specializing in innovation, adaptation, and by use of calculation, innovation, adaptation, and evolution itself. In other words, we are the fastest evolving thing that we know of in the universe. That's probably the way to think about it. And even among mankind, our different groups, whether you want to call them races or civilizations, adapt at different velocities. And I explained that the difference between civilizations is simply a function of their adaptive velocity, and I explain why that is. However, I get through so that basically covers everything, right? I cover from I can't show it to you, but I'll go through it covers the laws of nature, the man, biological facilities, our brain, our mental faculties, psychology, interpersonal psychology, social psychology, sociology, politics, group strategy, and group evolutionary strategies, and how those groups' evolutionary strategies played out as differences in evolutionary velocity. So the net result is I get to the end point of what I've described the continuity of the world through this physical process. And then I get to the point where I talk about the law, which is where I summarize all this and say, therefore, the law of continuous recursive adaptation, or innovation of adaptation, which is the law by which the world works, is expressible in these terms. And the fastest way man can adapt turns out to be the way the Europeans evolved it, which is that you minimize or eliminate every friction to trial and error, which is possible only under rule of law by the reciprocal insurance of one another's self-determination by self-determined means. In other words, total incentive to innovate by our armed insurance of one another's ability to do that by sovereignty in display, word, and deed, and demanding reciprocity in display, word, and deed from them. So this turns out to be this leaves only markets, and markets are the fastest way to evolutionarily calculate, especially when they're under that particular law, which is the most exhaustively suppressive of any system on Earth. Literally it maximizes human ability to compute and calculate. So the negative aspect, however, is that we don't understand what we're doing or why, and so we habituate this thing as a tradition. We essentially almost codify it in the American Constitution. But because Jefferson was a little fascinated by the French evasion of that reality, we got a little more French than Adams or Hobbes would have intended. And so we opened the door to the female means of warfare, which is, we spent 50,000 years domesticating man's method of warfare, or male antisocial behavior, and directing it to the production of commons. And in doing that, men had contained the antisocial behavior of women, although women had too, out of defense of women in general. But what happened is we let the Jewish elites into the country at the same time, who used the female strategy of undermining. We let women into the franchise to have voting power, but we didn't increase our law to suppress female antisocial behavior as thoroughly as we had suppressed male antisocial behavior. And so females manifested under the encouragement and designs of the Jewish thought leadership, and the female means of undermining our group evolutionary strategy, which is the fastest that's possible for all of mankind. and it's responsible for all the extraordinary gains of Western civilization. So the female group strategy is to undermine, right, its reputation destruction and its decoherence. Well, why? Because the female instinct among the Jewish group strategy is, as well as the female instinct, is mothering, which is that they want equality because they want the maximum chance for their offspring to and themselves to maximize consumption, hyperconsume, with the least constraints, regardless of their merit or value to the tribe. Whereas male reproductive strategy is just the opposite. We want to limit consumption of resources to that which it maintains male reproductive strategy, which is the adversarial competitive value of the tribe, which in the Europeans' case means continuous recursive hyper-adaptive, continuous recursive disambiguation of the universe into actionable elements that allow us for continuous exploitation, when no exploitation means the continuous transformation of energy from whatever its natural form into something we can use to maintain this virtuous cycle of continuous recursive innovation, adaptation, and evolution. So I go through this part at the end here and say, well, therefore, if you want to maintain that continuous recursive adaptation evolution in the European terms using these means, you just have to say what the Constitution implied but didn't write down, what Blackstone sort of said in his pseudo-deist language, and just put down what Darwin did. Darwin explained the reason for the outsized success of Western civilization, and the Marx, Bose, Frank Cantor, Freud, Bohr, all of them, every one of them, right up through Stephen Jay Gould, they've all rebelled against the reality of the truth, which is that they use the female strategy to obtain power through undermining the host civilization by accumulating the defectives, or the people who are unable to compete or feel that their status in the competitive hierarchy is too low, and they weaponize those people against the productive. So this is what we mean by Leninism or bio-Leninism, which is Jones incorrectly calls the Jewish revolutionary spirit, which is really the Jewish destructive or undermining spirit, which is the female undermining spirit, which is the female group evolutionary strategy for constraining males so that women can control their reproduction by choosing which males they mate with. So it's not complicated in evolutionary history. What's complicated is we're freaking bots and we have no idea what software we're running. So fundamentally, I'm just telling you what software the universe runs on, that it's incredibly stupidly simple, and that it manifests in all aspects of life, and that once we know this particular software algorithm, we can explain all of existence pretty easily, and in doing so we can no longer be bots, but choose to continue rapid adaptation and the benefits that are obtained from it, rather than fall victim, as the Romans did, to the first Jewish invasion by way of Christianity that undermined this with the false promise of freedom from scarcity, status, and class, because by the false promise that you were virtuous. Well, the answer is that it would have worked fine if it was a way for which the underclass and the women were able to obtain status despite a lack of commercial, intellectual, or military power. They were able to obtain status by not undermining the system, which is what Christianity could have evolved into as a part of the pagan cult. And instead, as we always seen, women will try to accumulate power. The Jews will try to accumulate power. Once this is possible, males will seize power, and then you get a clerisy that basically causes feedback to they cause feedback into the system that promotes the female dysgenic reproductive strategy at the expense of ongoing continuous recursive disambiguation of the universe by innovation, adaptation, and evolution. So what you see, of course, is that all civilizations under agrarianism that developed some sort of monotheism stagnated by 800 AD, and it was only the certain reserves of Europeans and the restoration of the classical literature from the Middle East back to Italy and up into Europe that allowed us to restore Western civilization's trajectory and recover from the dark ages of first Jewish invasion by way of Christianity, which explains today, which is the restoration of the repeat of the Jewish invention of Christianity by the Jewish invention of Marxism, neo-Marxism, postmodernism, feminism, PC, woke, anti-colonialism, anti-whiteness, and now anti-white males. So this complete hierarchy is explicable as this one very simple algorithm that the universe runs by, and we've just simply allowed it to flourish instead of suppressing it. And what that means is McCarthy wasn't anywhere near as severe as he needed to be. So this leads me back to the problem of how do I tell this particular story? Originally, I said I wanted to tell it as logic first and work up from logic to the sciences, and then from the sciences to the law, and from the law to how to solve the problem of our age. And I started out that way. What I've started to feel like is that I'd rather tell the story of the structure of the universe, because we know enough about the universe now, despite all the pseudoscience that's out there by the Brian Greens and other nitwits that sell, they're also Jewish, most of them, sell woo-woo to people for attention when it's all just woo-woo. When we probably know the structure of the universe right now, except for one basic fundamental problem, and that fundamental question is something we probably can answer, and it means there isn't any woo-woo left. The universe is actually quite simple. But if I start from that specific level and I work people up, I've got to work through all the sciences and all this stuff with this algorithm, right, alone, until I get to the logics as a manifestation, like language as a manifestation of that, and then explain it all. And so my stress is, do I explain the evolution of this thing, or do I go back and say, well, here's what I'm going to tell you, and tell you why it exists by the evolution of the thing. And I can't figure out what to do, and it's frustrating me because if I tell the story up front, then it's dependent on logic. I think I could lose the reader with, because the logic's quite rigorous. Whereas if I tell a story, by the time I get to the logic, the reader's seen it. But then the process I follow, which is to explain each of these human traits, epistemology, or what's something early on. So neurons, columns, right? Sentience, perception, qualia. If I explain all of those things, I'm going to leave behind an explanation of them that's dependent upon the logic that I'm discovered. So it seems I just sort of feel like I'm in this point. And I think I just gave myself the answer, which is the natural explanation is to tell it from physics on upward, and to explain to the audience as we go through it what it is we're doing, and maybe tell them in the first introduction, this is the journey we're going on. This is what you'll find. This is what it is. I think that's probably what it is, which is why I wanted to talk to you, even if you are just a screen, because by imagining what you're thinking, it helps me, and just talking through it out loud helps me, helps you be my therapist, my editorial therapist, and figure out how to communicate such a complex problem. The beauty and wonder of this is that, God spoke one word and it was called evolve, and he went out to lunch until we did. So I think that's, it's everything we learned about the universe is both beautiful, awe-inspiring, and humiliating, because it turns out how irrelevant we are. Now, my cure to this is the realization that we're the thing that calculates, and God can't do it without us. So God couldn't make the universe do us without us. So I think that's a pretty fascinating way to look at it, because I'm trying to find a way to maintain the idea of a mission for man with an anthropocentric model of God that maintains a a mission for man, which is pretty obvious now, while saying, well, we don't know if God's an agent outside the universe, what we call the universe, or emergent from the universe. It doesn't matter, but certainly the last one has to be true because we talk about God. So I'm trying to make everybody happy by including some basic deist premise, which is what the founders were, that this is the same thing. All right, so that's my talk. That's what I wanted to cover. I spent a couple decades now on this work, and it's killing me. But we're very close to the end. so at least we're talking about now how I organize the story, not what the story is. Anyway, all right. So I didn't think anybody would pop in, but we've got some questions. Do you guys want me to look at this? At your questions? John Smith says, on God's law and those that discovered it. Well, that's the implication, right? I mean, I just call it the law. Kingston, thank you. I hope you're well too. Is the universe all non-human entities? Well, the universe is whatever the whole set of the universe is. And right now we know what that structure, we know what the fine grain of the universe is. It's a dipole. It's basically thing it turns into a magnet. The problem is we don't know why that happens. There's an obvious answer, which means there's either too much constraining pressure on a volume, which forces energy to be expelled through motion, or there's too much energy for the volume, which causes energy to be expelled through motion. But in any event, the background energy of the universe is far higher than the density of the energy of the universe absent it. This is why they say dark energy is so big, right? But that's a really bad way of saying it. It's just that the available energy in the background of the universe is ridiculous. And it's more that we think of the universe as being the purpose of the universe being these stars and galaxies and whatever. And it turns out they're like the accidental byproduct of this process, which with the universe getting frustrated with itself. And the only way for it to get rid of energy is to manifest it through increasing hierarchies that organize that energy, because the universe itself at its finest level, it can't organize for this pressure reason we don't understand. In one of your blog posts comparing different, so you mentioned that Indian civilization is incomprehensible. Well, that's because it's actually, I can't figure out if it's genius, but you know how Indians didn't find the ability or need to create, in other words, think about Egyptian civilization. There's all these gods, and it forms this incredible mesh of interwoven ideas, and this allows for extraordinary subtlety to emerge across the civilization in different groups, populations, and cults. That's why I prefer polytheism, is that it is a great strategy for large numbers of people who are in different distributions to get along. So what happened in India is the same thing, is they never got to the point where they created a book. In other words, they didn't reduce it to a finite canon. And so when you look at India, I mean, we can look at Egypt and say, there's no way we can understand this because there's not enough of it left or whatever to fall back in their eyes. The thing is, you can look at India's culture that is from Sanskrit onward, and you can understand what they're saying because it's completely written down and it's basically in a new European language. But the complexity of it is preserved. So you sort of have to live it in order to get it. And this is something even Indians will say. You have to live it to get it. Now, I can reduce certain principles in it, but the beautiful elegance of it is still there in a way that is lost to us in Egyptian civilization. And it's certainly completely invisible to us into Mesopotamian civilization. So it's just like the richness of our civilization. I mean, we don't think of it this way because there's such an emphasis on writing. But the cities in Eastern Europe were just as, or probably larger than the cities in the Middle East at the same time. But it's a resource difference. They have a different resource problem than we do because they're crunched along these rivers and we're spread out over these territories, and they've exhausted theirs and we haven't exhausted ours. And so there's just different things, but we had just very complex cities. I mean, you would certainly rather live in 5000 BC in Northern Europe than you would in 5000 BC in the Middle East. There's just no fucking question about it. First of all, you wouldn't be a slave. And second of all, it wouldn't be utter chaos all the time. So it was probably pretty good. Europe's has a long tradition of this, whereas the Middle East, they're fucking screwed, right? I mean, as soon as your tribe, right, your clan gets enough access to control this bit of water, which means you can tax it, right? The next, you get domesticated enough, so the next tribe comes in and does it to you, and the next, so it's fucking chaos now. So when I say Indian civilization is incomprehensible to me, it means that I can't understand it the way I understand ours or Chinese or Semitic civilization, because I'd have to live there for 3 or 4 years and spend my time trying to understand it. I've said all along that German civilization is the most important one in Europe because they've managed to maintain duty and piety. The problem, and they did it despite this ridiculous thing they call continental philosophy, which isn't ridiculous, obviously, because it freaking works. German language is psychological, so it doesn't make the mistake of the English, which is being purely scientific and technological, and which is sort of depending on a coherence social coherence that the Germans don't take for granted. So I want to go live in Germany for 3, 4, 5 years at some point. Of course, I'm getting older now, but I'd like to do that because I'm pretty sure I could capture it as thoroughly as I've captured Anglo-Germanic civilization. Who's else? Good evening. Good evening back at you. Christian false promise is the promise of immortality after physical death. Well, yeah, but you're paying a cost during it, and you're gaining a benefit during it. So it's like, of the false promises, it's the least bad one. Why should I do a super chats feature? I don't know what that means. I realize I'm a technology guy, but I'm not a pop guy, so I don't know. Super chats is where you can pay to get your question answered, I think. If this thing was popular, if I thought you guys would want to listen to me, I would do this. I just assumed nobody would. Start your book with these words in the beginning. Well, that's what. You said that the same thing. God's law and those that discovered it. Well, yeah. Well, it is in the beginning. That's actually, I might fucking use that. So thank you. I'd hug you, man, if I could reach you. When are you going to publish with Dr. Brad? I asked him to start editing and trying the past month. He's probably far enough now. I hope he doesn't confuse you, though. Yeah, I like this. So Dr. Brad has said he will put those out. He already puts stuff out on his channel, and he mentions us now and then. The thing is that our relationship works in a way in other words, the value he has to me is that he acts like you, right? And he's able to convert what you guys think and feel into terms I can understand. So he forces me to state things in not curt language. He forces me to state things. And he also prevents me from being in other words, he doesn't let my anger show through, and he wants me to communicate the narrative as that we're bots and that we can't blame people for their historical background. We can only blame them for once they know what's going on, not adapting. So he's trying to make me be more scientific and less of a polemicist when I'm writing. So, but I'm not sure that will convey as much to you when you watch. I think or is that him outside of that dialogue? I'm not sure what that means. Like most things, whenever we're talking, what do the people say? Kurt creates a reality distortion field that affects the other people. And so the problem is that outside of that distortion field, people generally can't maintain the frame of thought. And so we'll see. I don't know. Yes, yeah, explaining it as a story makes it a little too bit Curtis Yarvin. I know, I thought about that. But though he takes it to the freaking extreme, right? I mean, he is the epitome of the Jewish storytelling. He emphasizes the story, he emphasizes critique, and 1% of it is solution, which wouldn't work. Not that I don't love the guy and admire him. It's just that he's a great example of the difference between Jewish and European thought, even though he's sort of half and half. Simon Svensson, just go with the physics. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too. I mean, that's what I wanted to talk to you guys about. I just wanted to think it through because I think I got to that conclusion. Russia is going to restore itself faster because they made a bet that we would go down faster than they could hold out, and they're going to win. So I would expect Russia to expand to the point Poland lets them. And I think that if Russia gets enough juice behind it, she will restore her ambition to unite Orthodoxy. The question is, like any production process, Russia can't create our same kind of rule of law and still hold that strategy. The problem is, to unite Orthodoxy, they have to rapidly convert to our rule of law. I don't know how they're going to do that. But I don't, I've finally begun to understand Dugin. Of course, he's sort of beautiful in his own mad kind of way. But I mean, I'd like to talk to him for the same reason I talked to Zizek, because when you get down, when everybody's talking theoretically, it's kind of nonsense. But whenever you talk about what actually is really happening on the ground, you get the same answer out of me, Zizek, and Dugin. Kurt, would a monarchy under P law be absolute? Well, it's not how it works. In the sense that in the English Constitution is still there that the king is above the law. But he's only above the law in the sense that regardless of whatever laws the parliament makes, the king can overrule those laws in order to restore the natural law. So an absolute monarchy can say, it doesn't matter what you folks want. I have the only long-term incentive other than my ordinary people, and therefore this is Hop, right? Hop's monarchy. Is that the interest of the monarchy is absolutely positively in the best interest of the country, which is why Germany failed as soon as the monarchy was gotten out, and France is the one who destroyed the monarchies. So, as soon as we have the French Revolution and this false promise, I mean, French equality of man is simply another version, a secular moralistic version of Christianity. All France ever has wanted to do is take over the church, and they did. But by destroying the monarchies, you destroyed the foundation of Western civilization, which is the long-term interest of the aristocracy on behalf of the people, simply because they have shared interests, while the ambitions of the upper caste, and the nobility, and the commercial financial class, the commercial class, and and especially the clerical classes, which are the worst of all, those people always and everywhere have incentives to consume capital rather than invest in future capital. Refugee heretic. Thank you, Mr. Kurt, for this scientific law. Hey, thank you, brother, for you guys sticking with me. It's been a brutal journey. You go through like this. What's that thing where you go through and they beat you as you go through the mass of men? My intellectual journey involves being beat up by everybody that I care about in pursuit of finding this law, which is the answer to the problem they need solved. When am I back in Kiev? Well, I don't know. It depends on business. I think Kiev is my home. There's a group of us forming in Portugal, and the weather's a little better. As you know, I have pretty horrific asthma, which you can probably hear. Like I'm sniffling. It's not because I have a runny nose; it's because I'm all inflamed. So that's a possibility. Um, but be, but I would love to go back to Ukraine because I love the people I love, and I want to finish my get my business back rolling again. I just can't do it until I'm a little farther along with this book. It's obvious P is an elitist program, so it's an it's not an elitist program. It's an anti-dysgenic program. In other words, it's everybody who is willing to work. Right? If you're willing to work and able to work, then it's for you. If you're not willing and able to work, in other words, I listen to people like, I want to be in the academy so I can think full time. Like, you mean so you don't have to work? So, there's a whole lot of people. I mean, we all try to evade the market because the market's competitive and it judges us correctly on our value to others. So it's not so much that it's elitist. It's that if the operating system for governments is law, and the least vulnerable operating system of law is natural law, and the only way of capturing that least vulnerable system of natural laws and scientific prose. So, I don't think people need to understand how to strictly construct law or all this other stuff, the science I've done. Basically, the law is simple. I've written it up as this is the foundation of it. This is what it is, right? And I don't care what you do with it. You can build any government you want as long as it's under these rules. Well, so dumbing it down, well, I mean, what people want is, what they can understand, which would be an ideology, political, a philosophy, social, and or interpersonal, and a rational, and a religion which is intuitionistic, and they want those, intuition and the spirit are the automaton. They want to satisfy the animal inside. All right, that makes sense. Reason wants to satisfy the next level of the animal, which is the reason. Science needs to satisfy action, which is the expression of the intuitionistic automaton, the animal reason, and the human action. So I have to just provide the greatest degree of precision. But if you want to look at who it benefits everybody except the financial sector and the state parasites. The only people who lose are them. And then if you're at the very bottom, well, it says you can't reproduce. That doesn't mean we're not going to take care of you. Well, you do that for 4 or 5 generations and the problem's over. Kingston, could we increase the high IQ? We don't really. You can't really increase it. At least nobody's been successful at it. That's not really true. Certainly the English were successful at it. Certainly the Ashkenazi Jews are successful at it. And certainly the upper caste Indians were the most successful at it in the world because they have the greatest number of them. And they don't have any negative biological consequences. The Jews did, and they have too small a pool and have vast dysgenia because of it. European elites tried to make too narrow a pool. I mean, the number of noble families is really 3. And so they didn't have enough of a large of a pool, so it started to emerge. But in the nobility, it didn't. The nobility was fine. Nobility still, I mean, if you were a Norman in 1000 or an Italian in 1000, those families are still the elites in both places. So as long as you intermarry in your class, you're fine. The problem is hot chicks emerge in the middle and bottom all the time, and we want them. So anyway, it's not really important to increase your high numbers. You need to increase the ratio of your high to your low. In other words, you don't want a pyramid like this. You want a pyramid close to this. And this bottom is, it's really 90 or 95, which is people can still operate machines. So below there, you can't. I mean, it used to be in the mid 80s. Now, I mean, if you can't run a machine, you can't do anything. You can't even wait tables. So you can't even move boxes. That means that somewhere between around 16-18% of the population in America, which we know who they are, those people are actually unemployable. But that number is going to rapidly reach 20 and then 25%. So what are you going to do with 25% of the population that's unemployable in any means, at any capacity? Well, you can't have them. So you can either burn down the civilization to try to save that 25%, or you can continue civilization by gracefully reducing that 25%, and then the percentage of your people over whatever income over IQ will naturally emerge. Yeah, we might be able to invent something to make superhumans, and I'm all for that. I just don't see that happening. I think it's just harder than we think. All I want is constant Q&A with Kurt. Please do this more often. Yeah. I don't know. If I thought I would get quality questions on a regular basis, then I would do it more often. Martin, this is where I see one of the biggest differences from NRX. Yes, they're absolutists. Why? Because, again, Marvin is Jewish. He thinks in the Jewish model. The Jewish model is monopolistic because they can't bear competition. They can't bear competition the way women can't bear competition because they're cognitively feminine, because just like women. So that's what they do. So you see Marxism as authoritarian monopoly, libertarianism as a monopoly, and neoconservatism as a monopoly, because they can't think of a world that contains competing forces. The Jewish people can't imagine or tolerate the fact that there are trifunctionalism, because it means that you are going to produce truth. Study how Marx took over the International sometime. He did it by pilpul, by lying, cheating, and scheming. Hold on. Holy crap, you guys type fast. Will Chinese expansion strategy be successful? Extremely likely that the Chinese will succeed. They are fascist. They are unapologetic. The political structure is insulated from foreign criticism. They have enough fundamental materials other than energy to dominate most industries. They have a population that will remain poor because there's just too many of them for a nearly infinite period of time, so they will have cheap labor, and they have succeeded, and they will not abandon one China and the unification strategy. So I don't see China being unsuccessful. I see China being isolated and eventually unifying as the leading force to use Islam against India and the West. That's my prediction. Will Germany restore itself? Hard to tell. Germany is going to collapse extremely quickly, because if you look at how dependent they are on autos, and you look at, I posted this morning, the rate of adaptation and the rate of Tesla and the rate at which China is investing, those companies American companies have to go bankrupt, because they have pension liabilities that can never be paid, which is what libertarians always said. Those can never be paid. It's an illusion. And they have debt that can never be repaid, partly because of accumulated pension liabilities, because we allowed unions to blackmail these organizations rather than continue market calculation. So our American companies are going to go away. The only one that'll probably survive, or at least they'll be you know, I mean, GM used to be was more than half, and now it's 16%. That was just a few years ago. So I expect these guys to be down in the single digits. And China has like 150 of these goddamn EV startups, and they have all the materials for it. And Elon Musk just trained them how to do it. So my view of Germany is pretty consistent with everyone else's, as that the only country in the Europe that has maintained military capacity is France. And even though it's trivial, they still have some. And that France, like China, has the political will. And that Germans, in the absence of the monarchies and under the false criticism that they were wrong for trying to just restore the German Empire that the French had destroyed, it's going to be very hard. So you're going to end up with France making a play for power, and she'll rapidly take over the Mediterranean, and she'll continue to allow Muslim integration. And you'll have Russia continue to allow Muslim integration. And so whatever's possible here is going to depend on whatever happens between Germany and Poland. Very hard to tell. You can only see pressures. You can't imagine how people can respond to them. Who's next? What happened is coming up. Well, I mean, I've maintained the Constitution is just. I'm like, well, okay, well, if you guys aren't ready for this, I'll switch back to the book, and I'll finish the book, and the Constitution is the last part of the book. So I'll just maintain with it. Like I said, I know what to do, but there's a lot of other people that want to do things. So if I get the opportunity to try to put forth a proposition for a constitutional convention like the founders did, in other words, the founders weren't politicians. They were, in other words, the founders didn't need to be. They were just representatives. If I could get enough representatives from the different parts of the country to put together a constitutional convention that would produce like the Declaration and a Constitution as a suit against the state, that's legal in our history. And so, a common law suit against the state is how the English and the Anglo common law tradition resolve these conflicts between the accumulation power of the state that's hostile to the people and the interests of the people. So I just think we'll do it that way. I think everybody else is going to fail, but I'm not going to dissuade them from creating a racket while they do it. Tidor the Sorcerer. People don't want truth. They want utility. This is Tidor the Sorcerer. People don't want truth. They want utility. So the truth is only as valuable as it's useful to them. Now, Darwin was useful because it allowed the academy to take over from the church. Darwin was the primary use. And so you had someone who could make use of it. So the problem with the church's long history of corruption, it was obvious. So and resisting knowledge. And so the same thing with the Enlightenment. It allowed the middle class to take over from the church and the aristocracy because they were like this. So, I mean, if you can empower somebody with some sort of increase in truth, that's great. But just like woke and PC and anti-whiteness and anti-colonialism and whatever, none of this stuff is true. It's all based on lies. But it doesn't matter because if people don't care about truth, they care about utility. And since we've vastly increased in the underclass, and then we've imported vast numbers of the underclass that are unfit for market civilization, of course that those people are going to buy the big lie. They don't want to say, I'm genetically at the ass end of the human spectrum. They want to say, I'm oppressed. It's not hard. I don't blame them for it. It's like people want me to be mad at Black Lives Matter or Antifa. And I'm like, look, Antifa is the scum of the earth and they're screwed. I understand. Black Lives Matter, well, they got more than half of their population is incompatible with advanced civilization, or the work requirements and the behavioral requirements of advanced civilization. They're screwed. So, I mean, why blame them for the fact that they're screwed? You have to find a political solution wherein both parties can be successful, and that happens to be one in which we produce commons that are suitable for each demographic, and each demographic needs those different commons and needs a government that can produce those commons. So the only way to do that is to separate, and that's just not complicated. Oh, would you mind going through the history of how Europeans abandoned our elites? Just read about the Boston Brahmins. This is my people. Once the aristocracy could no longer, once the rifle came out, the aristocracy could no longer be an armed minority that could control a large population. So that was the first thing. Secondly, once the middle class was creating all the wealth, without territory, the aristocracy became powerless. So what they did is what they did in England, which is why what they did in America is they converted to the financial sector. And so the problem is we should have let them convert to the financial sector, but we should have constrained their disabuses or their abuses the way we constrained abuses in the past. And like I said, if we had the Constitution I've put together, which is just an improvement of our existing Constitution, plugs the holes in it, they'd be a wonderful financial class because they would have common interests with us. But if you bring in Marxism, you make a financial class, and then you bring in Marxism to undermine, and you divide those classes, and you turn your working class against your aristocracy, well, fuck, they're going to turn against you, and they did. It's not complicated. It happened in England, happened in the Netherlands, happened here, happens everywhere. The only place it didn't happen so much is France, is because they fucking killed them all. They killed their middle class with the revolution against the Protestants, and they killed their upper class. And so the French ended up with what they wanted, a peasant majority, which means France went nowhere after the French Revolution. Instead of being an origin of science and thought, they became the source of the great lies of the 19th and 20th century. I mean, Rousseau creates the big lie. Kant imitates it for the Germans. Hegel runs with it. Marx takes Hegel, and then you you end up with the communism, which is really just a pseudoscientific version of the moral claims that the French made, which is just Catholicism, because the church is fundamentally a communist organization, always was, always existed to undermine us as a consequence as a communist organization. It was just captured for simple economic reasons by the nobility in the Middle Ages, and so it was used to keep the peasants domesticated without so much force of arms. So keep your streams semi-rare and ask for questions submitted up front. Get the high quality higher. Good idea. Refugee heretic. I would say that how would you suggest as a Protestant Christian I would sell this? Because there's no difference. It's really clear that the church was developing natural law. The scholastics got there. What happened was the church was too corrupt, and the Protestants railed against it, justifiably. The church, however, and then when we got to the 1800s, the church didn't reform, and it didn't go all the way over to natural law. It went backwards onto fundamentalism. What they should have said was that, see, we were right all along. The laws of the universe lead us to natural law. Natural law is this, and Christianity is the only way of tolerating, the only moral way of making God's law tolerable for man. And so we were right all along. See, And that's my argument. You're right all along. Claim victory. But if you're going to claim victory that the scripture is right, and you should reason from scripture instead of reason from the natural law, that the scripture is a loose, pretty vague, often wrong, description of, I'm okay. But the good part of Christianity comes out of the fact that, despite the fact that it was meant to undermine us like PC woke, it provided the underclass, people which we would consider working folk today, it provided the working class with a means of virtue by not doing wrong versus by achievement. That's important. We raised everybody up economically in the Mediterranean world. And now how do these people who are slaves and serfs and women and whatever, basically considered as domesticated animals, now that they have economic chances, how do they be virtuous despite the fact that they don't have any economic, political, and military power? Well, Christianity gave them that. In other words, Jesus was right. Just take fucking credit for it. But take credit for it by removing everything Semitic from it. Get rid of all that supernatural crap. Because all you have to say is, we don't know if God is outside the universe and made it. We don't know if the universe is analogous to the mind of God. We don't know if God emerges from the order of the universe in any way, whether that gives you the supernatural, the deist, or the scientific version, because gods do exist, because there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. So why not just, and this is what I can't do. And the reason, of course, is that Christians who are devoted aren't really devoted. What they are is they're pretending they have power to deny the world around them. And so I always say, it's really easy for me to tell a Christian from a non-Christian is that if you're deducing from scripture, in other words, you're trying to make an argument from it, you're not a Christian. If, however, you're saying, I'm behaving as Jesus suggested I behave in order to be fulfilled, then that's fine. And so my view is, I don't understand why Christians the Catholic Church doesn't reverse its doubling down on mysticism, it's going to be gone within a generation at the rate the church is going. And it means that the supernatural church is limited to South America and Africa. So if you want to maintain any church at all, it's got to be deist or emergent. And so you have to say that one, but either way, the teachings of the church were true. So they prepared people for advanced civilization. They've taught us how to tolerate the fact that evolution is a cruel master. God spoke that word. He gave us evolution, and it's cruel. But what did he do? He gave us Jesus to say that this is how you tolerate the cruelty of God's laws and help him build the Eden he envisions. So I just think it's really easy to tell other Christians what to do. The problem is they don't believe in Christianity because it's good. They believe in Christianity because it makes them feel like they can be authorities or powerful or argumentative, and this gives them status. In other words, they're not Christian. The Western elites believe they're the good guys. They believe that they are continuously rewarded in the service of what they believe, what people tell them is good. In other words, they're just in a feedback loop. John Smith, well, thank you for thanking me. How do we go back to the British Empire? It's really easy. We just do, and we're going to have to. So I think it's deterministic. I just want to get the noise out there. Of course, in my work, I state it has to happen. No, I don't, because I don't believe in any type of retreat, any type of giving up ground. I think that this is all wishful thinking. If you want to you want to make an equivalent of the Mennonites and the what the heck was their names? Right, I can't believe it's escaping me right now. If you want to make a little fundamentalist community, there are still some of those around. They breed like crazy. On the other hand, those communities exist because we allow them to exist. There's no reason that in the absence of our permissiveness or existing civilization, anyone allow you to exist. So you don't have a choice to separate and try your ideas. You have only the right to separate and impose your ideas. What do you think of publishing the book as several ones? It's because it was eventually really long, but now it's not. All right, I've made it pretty short. So all the work was doing that. All the work is in turning it from a bunch of essentially essays into basically science. And so I think it turns out to be pretty tolerable as it is. It will need other books. There will need to be a book on the application of the law, and that probably will be a book of the religion of the law. So it's not, it kind of sounds funny, but to us today, religion is just a means of law giving under one premise, and I'm just giving law under a different premise. So there's no difference between the two. I don't know what's going to happen to England because unless we do something about it. Yeah, the Orthodox Church did a great job. Of course, the Orthodox Church is small, a couple hundred thousand, couple hundred, maybe it's a couple hundred million. But they are nationalist, and they never tried to compete or never dared to compete with the state like the church did try to take over the state, and the Protestant churches tried to resist the state. So they were able to maintain their primary function, which is the production of the family. Okay, so I think I've run out of everyone's questions now. I hope you enjoyed this. I did. If there are any other questions, please post them. Otherwise, I'm going to log off and publish this. All right, this is Kurt Doolittle for the Propertarian Institute. Thank you for listening.